Hi there. I want to invite you to a super special free live training that I am giving with my friends at QGive on Thursday, July 21st, all about creating a future-proof nonprofit social media strategy. You can register right now for free at www.bit.ly/QGive and Julia. Once again, www.bit.ly/QGive, QGIV, and Julia. You don't want to miss this free webinar. You can also go to the show notes of this episode and click the link to register. You're going to learn all about how to navigate upcoming digital changes, the 4 pillars of social media management, actionable ways to engage your community, and more. See you on July 21st. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again for tuning in to the Nonprofit Nation podcast. Thrilled, as always, to have you here with me. I'm your host, Julia Campbell. And today we are talking about strategic planning. You know that I love all things planning, all things organizational planning. So we have with us today my new friend, Carol Hamilton. Carol is an organization effectiveness consultant who helps nonprofits become more strategic and innovative for greater mission impact. She facilitates strategic planning, helps organizations prepare for executive transitions, and provides training. She also trains frequently on leadership strategy and innovation topics as the host of the Mission Impact podcast. She graduated from Swarthmore College and has her master's in organization development from American University. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad that we connected. We connected on LinkedIn, I believe.
I believe we did, yeah.
Yes. Well, from one podcast host to another.
Exactly.
Thanks for being here. How did you get involved with the work that you're doing? How did you get involved with nonprofits and strategic planning?
Oh, it's a long and winding road.
It always is.
Yeah. My very first job out of college, I ended up working for a small company, small business that helped people get on talk shows. And, that was back when it was regular radio. Of course, they still exist, but podcasts weren't a thing yet. And in doing that, we promoted all comers, any client that wanted our services, we helped them get the word out. And so with that experience, I ended up moving back to Washington, D.C., where I'm from. And of course, it's kind of nonprofit central, and decided that I wanted to make a shift to, if I was going to be helping promote causes, I wanted to promote ones that I believed in. So that's what really shifted me into the nonprofit sector. And then as I worked in organizations, became increasingly interested in what made organizations work, what made groups and teams work. Why did some organizations have really wonderful, lofty missions, but then there was a disconnect between that and how people actually treated each other inside the organization? All those things started to intrigue me. And so that's what really led me to organization development. And so strategic planning is a subset of organization development. That field really covers, anything from individual one-on-one coaching, executive coaching, to, working with networks of organizations. So there's a huge breadth of things that you can do within that field. But one of the things that I became familiar with through that is the StrengthsFinder assessment. And when I took that, and then actually it was when I was doing some work with a team that wanted to apply it, I noticed that maybe 4 out of 5 of my top strengths were all in the category. They have 4 categories that they break it down to, and one of them is strategy. And 4 out of 5 of my top strengths were in that strategy column. So I was like, okay, I think the universe is telling me something.
Yes. Do you do the Enneagram as well?
I haven't done that one. A lot of people talk about that, but I haven't done that one yet. I've probably done all the others. I love
I haven't done
Myers-Briggs.
StrengthsFinders. I'm intrigued
Yeah,
by it.
StrengthsFinder is a really useful one. And I really love that obviously in its name, it focuses on strengths. And that's the kind of approach that I like to take with organizations, really building on their strengths, appreciating what's working within the organization and how can you build on it. But that's basically how I got to doing planning with organizations.
So the thing with strategic planning, as I've worked in nonprofits for about 20 years, I was a development director, marketing director. I've been through the strategic planning process. And I think there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about what it is. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your philosophy and what are some of the elements that go into a successful process?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things is that I say that it can be fun. And I think for most people, when they think of strategic planning, there's a little bit of groaning that goes along with it. Like, oh my God, do we have to do that? It's like, maybe similar to going to the dentist. But no, it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be arduous, a long, complicated process. Yeah, my approach is really to making sure that you're taking the time to really map out the ecosystem that you live within. Who are all the key stakeholders that are going to be important to your organization's future? And then how are you going to involve them? Not everyone's going to be involved in the same way, but making sure that there's some involvement at the front end, whether that's you're interviewing either board members or strategic planning committee members, or your consultant is talking to those external stakeholders as well as internal stakeholders, surveys, those kinds of things. So you're gathering information, but then really helping the group go through a series of, you're kind of going wide, you're looking at all the possibilities, and then you have to have some processes for, okay, how do we make some decisions? How do we bring this all together? And one of the things that I actually find, I think a lot of people are afraid when they're going into a process, and especially probably the leaders, the board chair, the executive director, they may feel like my folks are just super unique. We have a whole wide range of opinions, perspectives. And what I actually find is that going through the process, people learn that there's more agreement than they might have been aware of.
I think that's fantastic. I think that's really true. I think that we tend to think the board is on this one level, maybe the staff is on a different level, the volunteers are on a different level, all the stakeholders are in different places, but we all have this common thread. We all care about the problem being solved. We care about the mission. We care about the solution that the nonprofit is providing, and hopefully we care about sort of the way to get there. So what are some of the most common mistakes that nonprofits make when they're entering this process or when they're going through this process?
Yeah. So I think actually one of them is that fear of including too many people, that it's just going to be overwhelming. And so leadership groups will kind of try to keep it pretty contained and maybe only include a few people from the board, maybe the leadership team. And I think you lose a lot when you keep it that small. And then using that approach, you're then going to everybody later and saying, okay, well, here's our plan, and, help us, give us your feedback. And then, 6 months later, folks are wondering why folks aren't excited about it. Well, they aren't excited about it because they weren't part of the conversation. They didn't see how you got to those 3 things are the most important. So being willing to open it up and bring people in, again, their role is not all going to be the same. They may be brought in the beginning just to have a conversation, be in a focus group, answer a survey, and then a group of, and I would argue for most organization, it really needs to be both board and staff. Now, board is, the one tasked with managing a strategy for the organization, but you need to have a conversation between board and staff to have that be realistic. So I think another mistake organizations can fall into is just, getting so elaborate or kind of pie in the sky with their vision that there's no grounding to reality of what the actual capacity of the organization is, like how far they are from, okay, here's our vision for the future, but no recognition of where you are. So you need something kind of in the middle, right? You want to have those parts in the process where you are dreaming big, but then, having some realism as well. I think one of the biggest ones, and this is the one that, leads to people always saying, oh yeah, we went through that whole process and now the plan's sitting on the shelf, no one's using it, is that there was no process for really operationalizing the plan. So what I like to do with clients is once the kind of bigger picture, higher level, 3 to 5 goals, no more than 5. I don't let people have more than 5.
Even 5 sounds like a lot, but I know that nonprofits like to have a lot of goals.
Right. I usually tell them 5 is a lot. Can we dial it back here? But then to take that kind of bigger picture and then work with staff to do a 1-year implementation plan. And I also don't want groups to, I think another pitfall that folks can fall into is actually trying to nail everything down and making it too complicated. So, why is it a 100-page plan? Because you tried to predict what you're going to be doing in 3 years. If anything that we've been taught over the last 2 years is that change is constant. You can't predict the future. And so just saying, okay, we're going to get down into the nitty gritty, who's doing what by when in that 1-year implementation plan. But then the second piece of that is really making sure that you have a process for review and updating and to then make the next year's implementation plan.
That's something I really wanted to talk about. So there's kind of 2 questions here. One is, what is your top recommendation for operationalizing a strategic plan, making it actionable? Because I think that is the hindrance for a lot of organizations that did maybe more traditional old school strategic planning, where they created a lot of ideas, but perhaps they didn't have the bandwidth or capacity to actually implement them. So what is the first step to really operationalize this document and make it a living document and not something that just sits either on a digital shelf or an actual shelf?
Well, one of the funny ones is actually in the process of working with the groups at one stage when they're defining what their goals are. You've got groupings of folks have had a chance to say what they think the top 3 things are that the organization should do. And then we've grouped them, is to not have those just be headers. So a lot of times that'll be communication, fundraising. One of the rules I have is that no, it has to have an action verb. It's not a goal unless there's a verb attached to it. And something simple like that then gets people thinking, okay, what is it that we want to be doing? And then from that larger headline, the increase whatever or enhance, blah, 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 strengthen, whatever those things might be, then to have a couple action steps, but not only have the action steps, but then also define what does success look like? And that could be metrics or it could be progress indicators. So it's not always going to be the same thing, but how are we going to know that we've made progress on this? How are we going to know that we're moving towards the target that we're imagining? So having those 2 pieces, I think, really helps then to get into then when you're getting to that next step of the implementation plan or the operationalizing it, you already have a roadmap in terms of where are we going, what's the action we want to take, and then what does it look like when we get there?
Do you think nonprofits need to have been around for a little while before they do this process, or is this something they can do as a startup?
I think they can do it as a startup. I think that it's going to be more of a guess. And the truth is, no one can predict the future. So that's not really what strategic planning is about. And I think that's another misconception, is that it's about trying to predict the future. And it's really not. But I think when an organization is starting up, if they can stay in that mindset of we're going to do some experiments to see what works and what doesn't, and have some idea of, again, what's our hypothesis? What might be a solution towards that? How are we going to evaluate whether this experiment has worked or not? To be in kind of that almost like scientific process at the beginning to be able to then iterate. And I think for any organization, whatever maturity level they're at, making sure that you have that process for check-in. And it's not just about how far have we gotten on our goals. It's also actually asking, is this goal still relevant? Because there may be things that you decided in your plan were super important that 2-3 years later you look at and you're like, no, it's not working, or it's not relevant anymore. And I try to remind people that the plan is just a plan written by a group of people, and it can be changed, just like you talked about, that living document. It's not a tablet from on high. Hopefully, it's a Google Doc, right? And they can be edited. So it's not written in cement. And not to say that you want to be constant. I've been in organizations where their strategic direction dramatically changed every couple of years. And with that kind of situation, staff just end up with whiplash of where are we going? So you don't want to be that, reactive to whatever the new brilliant idea that the executive director came up with, but also not be so inflexible. So kind of finding that middle ground of enough flexibility to be able to respond to new things that come up, but then also, okay, let's stick to our knitting and this is what we've committed to and let's keep moving it forward.
I mean, there might not be a one size fits all answer to this, but how often do you recommend that nonprofits kind of revisit and evaluate and look at the plan?
I would say evaluating the current plan and kind of looking how far have you gotten? What do you need to adjust in terms of, your expected timeline? Are there refinements to goals that you need to make? That I would say at least on an annual basis. But then for the actual kind of full-fledged strategic planning process, typically groups I'm working with, they're either they're doing it every 3 years. They have a 3-year plan. They have a 5-year plan. I would say in this environment of 5 years, really as far as you can go out. But I also like to work with groups to make sure that at the end of the process, they not only have a strategic plan, they also have what's known as a strategy screen. And this is not something that I designed. It's La Piana Consulting really put this idea forward, but it basically is setting up a process for making decisions about all those things that you couldn't anticipate in the plan. Inevitably, something's going to come up that even with as much due diligence and deliberate conversation and visioning, you're not going to anticipate. So rather than either getting excited about that thing or if it's a threat, getting really caught up in it, depending on kind of who's explaining the thing and are they an influential voice in your organization? Are they a particularly persuasive person if it's an exciting new opportunity? Having a strategy screen actually gives you a deliberate way where you've pre-decided these are the criteria that we're going to use to make a decision, to be able to then run something through it essentially and kind of evaluate. It's going to be a number of different criteria. Often the very first one is, how does this support our mission? Is this within our core competency? Will this enhance our reputation? Will we be able to fundraise for this? So, a lot of often common criteria that go across organizations, but then others that are unique to their situation. And just with each of those items, kind of, is this low or high? Is there a high possibility that we're going to be able to raise money for this, or is it, going to be really hard? And so just being able to have a more deliberate conversation about those new opportunities or challenges and being prepared for that versus just at the whim of whoever has the best shiny new object presentation skills is particularly persuasive, all of those kinds of dynamics. It can be a kind of a mitigating factor to that.
I love that. And I just listened to a podcast by Seth Godin, and he was talking about leadership. And he said exactly what you said. He said that leadership is really setting up the framework and the lens through which to evaluate all of these decisions that we have to make every single day, all of these shiny new objects coming at us. There are thousands of avenues and roads and little potholes, like places there we could go that could derail us, or we could just go off chasing, things like a squirrel. But to have that framework, so things are not arbitrary, but also so things are a little more focused. And this is really what I teach my clients, because they come to me with digital marketing overwhelm and problems. And they just need a tool. Like you said, the strategy screen, I think that's brilliant. Like, how can we evaluate all of these fantastic things coming at us, all of these great ideas, all of these opportunities, and how can we determine which ones are going to get us to our goals and which ones are maybe going to look great in the beginning, but also maybe get us off course. So I think that's one of probably the biggest benefits of the strategic planning process. Would you agree?
Well, like I said, I like to make sure that at the end of the process, they have both. They've identified those big goals, but then they also have this tool that enables them to evaluate those things that they couldn't anticipate. And so you talk about Seth Godin talking about leadership and that framework, and too often that's in somebody's head. So this gets this out on paper. It gets it explicit. It's a group process where folks are agreeing to, okay, these are the criteria that we're going to use no matter what the situation is, so that it's being looked at, whatever the opportunity or threat is being looked at from lots of different angles.
I agree. I think that is one of the main benefits. Like you said, you have it down on paper. It's not just this institutional knowledge that's in someone's head that might be lost when they leave or take another position, or, something happens. So a very common refrain I hear in terms of marketing, I'm sure you hear it all the time, is my organization has a lot of stakeholders, 10 million audiences. How do I effectively involve all of these audiences in the process without it being like an overwhelming number of voices and opinions?
Yeah. So I think that's, being intentional about mapping out who all those audiences are first. What are the key groups? Obviously staff and board, probably volunteers. Are there, clients, the constituents, partners? Who are all those folks? Government officials? There may be different people in different organizations, ecosystems, depending on what their goals are. And then really thinking through, how are we going to get input from them? And then how is that going to inform the planning process? And in most cases, getting input may be, like I said, it could be an interview. It could be inviting people to answer a survey. It could be asking them to participate in a focus group. And all of those people that you're gathering information from at the beginning aren't necessarily going to be the folks who are there in the planning sessions. And that's going to be a combination of board and staff when I do it. But being clear with all of those folks how the information is going to be used, and then being able to cycle back and say, okay, this is what we heard from you, and this is informing our planning. So, when I'm working with groups, and I'm often the one doing those conversations, holding those focus groups, but I always offer the strategic planning committee, who's usually a group that isn't necessarily the one charged with doing all the planning, but they're my partner to help keep the process moving and make some key decisions, like who are the stakeholders that we're going to tap into in terms of this process. And then synthesizing, what have we heard from all those folks? What are the key themes that the planning group, board and staff need to grapple with about the organization's future?
That's so important, because so many organizations do struggle with, how do we actively involve and engage all of the different stakeholders? And I know for me, as an example, I'm on the school board here, and we're actually going to go through a strategic planning process. But even before the process, we have tried to involve all the different stakeholders and see what's most important to them. But then at the end of the day, of course, we need to make a decision about where we're going and take everything into account, but help people understand that not every single idea can possibly be implemented. So yeah, I appreciate what you said about that. So another thing we have in common is we both love Simon Sinek's Start with Why. That is how I literally start all my marketing engagements, all my consulting engagements, they have to watch that TED Talk and hopefully read the book. But you write, despite the popularity of Start With Why, leadership groups often have trouble staying at that level. And it's likely that without a lot of discussion about why you should or should not do a program, the discussion jumps into how you would do the program. So I know a lot of people listening to this that really resonates with them because they are development people, marketing people, people in the trenches. And oftentimes they have so many things thrown at them. They just have, program officers and EDs and boards are constantly throwing new ideas at them. So how do we get back to the why and get out of the how?
Yeah. I think, that strategy screen is a way to kind of sift through. I mean, I think when you're talking about programs, one of them is the danger of, jumping into that how immediately without really thinking about, are we the right group to be doing this? Is this actually going to move our mission forward? Connecting it back to the mission. And it's interesting when I'm doing strategic planning, oftentimes groups, they're like, okay, we want to do mission, vision, and values. And I actually put all of that at the end of the process. So we've done the interviews with folks and we've gone through the process, and then we look at your mission, your vision, and your values. And for most organizations, they're looking at it to make sure that it's still up to date and relevant. But going back to the why of the organization, and actually one of the things that I often ask people in interviews is, what is the purpose of this organization? Why does it exist? Or what would be missing if this organization no longer existed?
That is exactly what I say. What would be lost?
What would be lost? And usually it's like, well, it would get recreated, right? Because the need is still there. But it's one of the things I want to kind of see at the beginning of how much clarity and or agreement is there about what's the organization's purpose and why it exists. And if people really struggle with answering that question, it's a big red flag. I think in our society, we are very rewarded for being action oriented. We value doers, even board members, when we bring them on, whether if they have a business background or whatnot, it's often that I've gotten XYZ done. And so it's just what people are more used to doing. So staying in that, why should we do this? Should we do this? Is challenging. And so that's why that's one of the reasons that I really love that strategy screens tool, because I think it gives people, they don't have to, it's like trying to think of an exercise, like, an exercise analogy of like, if you've done enough reps, but it's like, it gives you, I don't know, what's something that helps you do the exercise that if you're struggling with, right? If you're beginning, like, well, if you're doing yoga,
like a personal trainer,
like if you're doing yoga and you have modifications, you can use a block for this. You can use a strap. So the strategy screen is just like that modification to help you stay in that why.
I love that. I talk about that a lot, but I also don't follow my own advice.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
And I listen to podcasts and I read books, and I'm such a huge fan of always understanding, like you said, that's such a good framework. Why? And then should you? Like those are two questions that need to be answered, not how to do it, not can we do it, not how much is it going to cost, not how many people do we need, but let's just go back to grassroots. Let's go back to the why, and let's go back to should we or should we not do this?
And there's another wonderful exercise. It's kind of like embodying your inner 3-year-old. It's called the 5 whys or the 7 whys, where you ask, so why should we do this? And then you have the first answer. Well, why is that important? And then why is that important? And that often really gets you to the root of something that if you'd only asked it once, you're really staying at the surface. And it kind of gets to what's the real key motivation behind whatever thing you're exploring.
I love that. My son is 7 and he still does that.
Well, good for him, right?
Yes. Oh no, he is always like, why is this? And why is that? And why? And then always 10 more whys. But I think it's great, but that's such a brilliant idea. So I will Google that. I will put it in the show notes. So you're a fellow podcaster. Tell me about your podcast, the Mission Impact podcast? How did it start? And what's the purpose? What's the why of the podcast?
Yeah. So I say that the tagline for the podcast is mission impact for nonprofit leaders who don't want to be a martyr to the cause. So I'm very much a believer in that we do more for our causes if we're not killing ourselves in the process. So, a lot of consulting helps people take that step back, slow down a little bit. So I'm talking to other professionals who work with nonprofits, often a lot of consultants who are helping nonprofit organizations with a variety of different issues, whether it's marketing and fundraising or other strategic planning people, folks who are helping organizations shift cultures to a more healthy culture, building out capacity in terms of being more inclusive, building cultures of belonging. Those are the kinds of things that I like to explore. And it started, I was at a conference for other nonprofit consultants, and there was a panel of folks who were getting close to retirement. And they were talking about kind of pondering and not having an answer, but kind of pondering, what's my legacy? And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to, and they were talking about how there's this whole kind of group, parallel to the sector as a whole, there's a whole generation of people who are retiring. I mean, I feel like since I started in the nonprofit sector, people have been talking about when the baby boomers were going to retire. And I think maybe it's actually finally happening. But they were talking about that. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to talk to all these folks? And then I'm like, well, everyone's always talking about do informational interviews. Well, why not just record them and make them available to other people? So that's kind of where it started. I talk to people across all different generations in terms of career, perspective, but that's kind of the kernel of where it started.
Wow. I missed that conference for consultants. Let's bring it back.
The Alliance for Nonprofit Management.
Great. Okay,
it's a great organization.
I'll look that up. I'm excited to listen to your podcast. Everyone check out Mission Impact. And that's just wherever you listen to your podcast, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And where else can people find you, Carol? Where do you want people to connect with you online?
Yeah. So check out the podcast, Mission Impact. Also, my practice is named Grace Social Sector Consulting. So you can find me at gracesocialsector.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Love to connect with people. So yeah, any of those places would be a great place to connect.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And yeah, stay in touch. And I'm so excited that all of you are listening. Thanks again, Carol, for being here.
Thank you so much. And great questions, great conversation. I really appreciated it.
Well, hey there. I wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at JuliaCampbell77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.